Hello everyone, this is Jennifer. So in this video we're going to start with the rights of an unpaid seller. So according to section 45, what do you mean by an unpaid seller? The seller of the goods is deemed to be an unpaid seller within the meaning of this act. So basically two meanings. One is when the whole of a price has not been paid or tendered, meaning the price of the goods is not being paid by the buyer to the seller. So at that time he is being known as the unpaid seller. Or when a bill of exchange or other negotiable instrument has been received as conditional payment and the condition on which it was received has not been fulfilled by reason of the dishonor of the instrument or otherwise. To put this in an example, buyer has given the bill of exchange or other negotiable instrument to the seller, okay, to pay for the goods, but that has been dishonored, meaning to tell that has been cancelled or it has not been honored for receiving cash. At that time it is considered to be not the payment not yet being made. The payment is not being made. So that time also he becomes a unpaid seller, where he has not received his payment. Unpaid seller has a right over the goods if the goods are not delivered and on the buyer of goods are delivered. So the various rights which an unpaid seller possesses. So rights against goods and rights against the buyer. So first we look into the rights against goods under section 46 subsection 1. So these are the various rights against goods. First one is a lien or right of retention. Lien is basically nothing but a right to retain possession of goods until the payment of the price is made. So just basically retaining the goods by the seller till the buyer makes the payment. So a lien on the goods for the price while he is in possession of goods, or in case of the insolvency of the buyer, a right of stopping the goods in transit after he has parted with the possession of them, a right of resale as limited by this act. So basically three liens. One is he can possess the goods, or he can stop from delivering the goods, or he can resale the goods by within the limits of the act. So what happens when an unpaid seller has made part delivery of goods? He may exercise his right on lien on the remainder, meaning to tell the remaining goods he can possess it and he can deliver it only when the payment is made. So these are the rights of lien for the seller's point of view. And also there's another point, when all he can possess the goods is where the goods has been sold without any stipulation as to credit, or when the goods have been sold on credit but the term of credit has been expired, or where the buyer becomes insolvency of paying back to the seller. So we're looking on to the next point. We finished with a lien or right of retention. The second point, which is right of stoppage in transit. By the word itself we get to know, so by the word transit itself we get to know it's just movement of goods. So the seller, the unpaid seller, stops the movement of goods from the seller to the buyer. That is what is this right talking about. So the right of stoppage in transit is a right of stopping the goods in transit after the unpaid seller has parted with the possession of the goods. The unpaid seller may exercise his right of stoppage in transit either by taking actual possession of the goods or by giving a notice to the claim to the carrier or other bailee in which possession of goods are there. So according to the sections, how to stop the goods when the buyer becomes stop the goods when the buyer becomes insolvent, or when the goods are in movement from the seller to the buyer. So when payment is not made, they will stop the transit of goods. Point number 3, the rights of resale. So the unpaid seller can resell the goods. Why? Because the buyer has not paid the payment, so he can resell the goods instead of waiting for the buyer if he has become insolvent. So when the goods are of perishable nature, so that time he can resell the goods before it loses its expiry date, or where he gives notice to the buyer of his intention to resell the goods and the buyer does not within the reasonable time pay or tender the price. Okay, so that time the seller has a right to resell the goods. And if on a resale the goods within a reasonable time and recover from the original buyer damages for any loss which are due to the breach of contract, but the buyer shall not be entitled to any profit which may occur on the resale. So if there are any damages, that the buyer will take care, but if there are any profits out of resale, that will not be taken care by the buyer. It is only for the seller. The last one, which is that we move on to the last one, which is the right to withhold delivery. So if we finished with right of resale, so reselling the goods, now you move on to the right to withhold delivery. So if the property in the goods has passed, the unpaid seller has a right as described in the previous rights. So if the property in goods has not passed to the buyer, the unpaid seller has, in addition to other remedies, of right of withholding delivery similar to coexistive with his rights of lien and stoppage and transit where the property has passed to the buyer. Right of stoppage and transit, while moving they are stopping, but right of withhold delivery is not delivering. To deliver only they are passing back and coming back. So that right also a unpaid seller possesses. So the next rights against buyer. So there are 4 rights against buyer which a unpaid seller possesses. First one is suit for price. So why basically he becomes an unpaid seller? Because he does not get his payment. So at that time this right can be exercised where under the contract of sale of property the goods has passed to the buyer and the buyer wrongfully neglects or refuses to pay for the goods according to the terms of the contract, the seller may take him to the court and make him pay for the price of the goods. Second one is suit for damages for non-acceptance, where the buyer wrongfully neglects or refuses to accept and pay for the goods. The seller may sue him for damages for not accepting the goods. Third one is repudiation of contract before due date. So when a buyer repudiates a contract before the due date of delivery, the seller may either treat the contract as subsisting and wait till the date of delivery, or he may treat the contract as rescinded and sue for damages for the breach of contract. Meaning to tell, just removing the contract and making the buyer to pay for the damages of the contract or breaching of the contract. The last one is sue for interest. So if there is a specific agreement between the buyer and the seller for payment of interest or the price of goods from the date on which the payment becomes due, the seller has a right to recover interest from the buyer. But there is no specific agreement to this effect. The seller may charge interest on the price when it becomes due from the day as he may notify the buyer. In the absence of the contract, to the contrary, the court may award interest at such rate as it thinks fits for the amount of price from the date of tender of the goods or from the date on which the price was payable. So basically charging an interest from the buyer to the unpaid seller. Thank you everyone.